All right, guys. So we're gonna get started. So first off, you're gonna write the focus question on the worksheet. At the top, you'll see it says write focus question. Um, and then you're gonna copy this down. What were the details of the three main groups of immigrants that came to America from 1870 to 1920? So yesterday we took a long time really going over, the main reasons for immigration. We looked at cultural pluralism. We looked at as a whole why a person immigrates to the United States. But now we want to focus in on three of the major groups. The three major groups we're going to focus in on are the Italian, the Irish, and the Chinese. These are the three main immigrants that came to the United States, and they're not random. These were the three largest groups of people that came to the United States throughout the late 1800s, early 1900s. So I think it's important to focus in on them, both why they left their country and two, chose to came to the United States. And the third thing is we want to see how they were kind of treated when they got to the United States. So I want to share I want to look at the document with you really quickly. Hold on one second. That's not it. All right, so if you're looking at the immigration note catcher here, if you're looking at the immigration note catcher, you will see we have three different types of immigrants, okay? And then we have the questions, why did they leave their homeland? How are they treated in America? Okay, so these are the two questions we're going to answer, and we're going to fill in these two boxes. So how are we going to do this? Well, we are going to go to the PowerPoint to show you. So notice how we have in red and blue two different things. When you see something written in blue, you're going to write the notes down in blue for the Irish here. And then when you see something in red, you're going to write it in red. Okay, so I'll show you when we get back to the slide, but this is how the breakdown is going to go. All right, so let's go back to here. And before you write anything down, I just want to show you what's written in blue is going to go to the blue part of the box. What's written in red is going to go to the red part of the box. All right, we're kind of note-taking in a different type of way today, but you'll see why soon. All right, so this is a map of the world. First off, you want to look at where Ireland is. Now, I'm fairly certain you cannot see my mouse, so you have to kind of listen to my words. If you look in the continent of Europe, okay, in the most west area, it's almost like a little island, there's a place called Ireland. Okay, it's northwest of France, okay, it's north of Spain. And the Irish are the first major group of immigrants to come into the United States. And that should make a little bit of sense because they're from northwestern Europe, so that's one of the main areas where people come in from. And you're also going to notice that it makes sense because it's very close to the Atlantic Ocean, and they're just a Atlantic Ocean sail ride trip away, a boat ride trip away. So let's look at the Irish. I'm going to give you a minute to copy without me speaking. You're going to write the blue into the blue box for the Irish and the red into the red box. Okay, and then we'll discuss a couple of these details here. So I'll give you a minute to do it. Okay, so as you can tell in blue, it answers the question, why did the Irish leave their homeland? So if you paid attention to the web quest, you would have probably actually already known this answer. The Irish left their homeland of Ireland mostly because they had a very bad disease breakout in their potato crop, and they actually had what's known as a potato famine. Now, famine is another word for a shortage of food, okay? And the Irish left their homeland of Ireland because of this shortage of food. We're not talking like a little thing where like, okay, they have to miss a meal or two. Like the people of Ireland were literally starving because the disease got into their potato crop, and most of the food that the people of Ireland ate at the time was the potato, okay? Different forms of potatoes. So then the Irish are kind of like forced to leave, because they're literally starving. And in the 1840s and the 1850s, when a lot of them end up coming to the United States, they end up sailing over to the United States. And that is one of the main reasons for immigration, right? If there's a problem in someone's homeland, like the Irish were having, it's a big reason why a lot of them leave. So when a lot of them come to the United States, the many Irish immigrants, and this is how some of them looked here, okay, they were, most of them were white, coming from Ireland, most of them were white, and most of them kind of looked, and I'm going to put in like quotes here a little bit, like typical Americans of the time. They looked like typical Americans. They were kind of light-skinned, and they kind of had the look of a quote-unquote American. And we know the definition of what an American is a lot different in 2021. But back in American history, you really only had white people and black people, and that was really it. So they looked like a very prototypical American. And when many of the Irish immigrants came in, they settled in Boston. Boston is in Massachusetts. You guys remember it from the Revolutionary War period. Many of them moved up there. So if you go up to Boston now, a lot of the people up in Boston are of Irish descent. And many of them worked in factories. The Irish were generally pretty good at building stuff and making stuff with their hands. But as you could tell, they were not treated very well when they got here. Okay, first off, even though they looked American, if you ever heard an Irish person speak, they have a very heavy accent. So once you hear them speak, you will clearly tell that they are not from the United States. And this is very typical. If you're not from the United States at the time, you're often more discriminated against than maybe you would in 2021. Okay, now is there still discrimination in 2021? Sure, of course, but not nearly the same way it used to be. They also practice a very different religion. They were a part of the Roman Catholic religion, which was a lot different than the people in the United States at the time. So they not only sounded different, they practiced a little bit of a different religion. All right, and this is also somewhat of a consistent thing. If you practice a different religion, especially at this time when people were generally a lot more religious, this became a lot more of a problem. And this is also something that I should just kind of mention. The Irish were also stereotypically and generally very aggressive people. The people of Ireland drank a lot more than maybe even people in the United States at the time. So when they came and they did a lot of drinking, obviously one of the side effects of drinking is to get a little more angry, to do things like that. So the Irishmen were also very aggressive. Okay, they were also very aggressive people. They got into a lot of fights, which often leads to some problems dealing with this. All right. So the blue should be in the blue box. The red should be in the red box. We need to move on to the focus, the Regents practice questions here. Okay, so the Irish were the first main group coming to the United States. We know because we see the dates 1840 to 1880. This was usually the first wave of immigrants who's coming from northwestern Europe, and Ireland is located in the most western part of Europe. So this should make sense to us. Okay. So if you want to put it in the chat, please do. Okay, there's only 5 of you here, so please try and participate. Even if you're wrong, don't just sit there without writing an answer down. Increased immigration from Ireland to the United States during the 1840s was primarily a result of what? 1 is the correct answer. Excellent. Crop failures in Ireland that led to mass starvation. Yes, the people of Ireland were starving. Therefore, many of them ended up leaving. All right. During the 1850s, the Irish immigrants were often discriminated against because they what? Good, Jacqueline. That one is 4. Okay. So way to be on top of this. Very good job. Okay, let's go on to the next group, the Italian immigrants. Now, the Irish were the biggest number of immigrants to come in the first wave. The next biggest number is going to be the Italians. So we're going to go back to Europe. So you're looking in the center of the map here. Okay, and you'll notice about Europe, okay, they have a country in orange towards the south called Italy. All right, if you really zoom in, you can tell I can't really do it here. Italy is a country located in the southern part of Europe, and they're going to come a little bit later on in American history. Okay, they're going to come more towards like 1890, 1900. This is where the second wave of immigrants start to come in. So the same thing, I'm going to give you a minute to copy this down. Okay, minute to copy this down, and then we'll go over both why they came to the United States and two, how they were treated. Okay, so as you could tell, very different from the Irish, Italians weren't starving. There's plenty of food in Italy. They didn't have a problem with starving. They had a separate problem in their own country. A lot of people in Italy were very poor. The poverty rates in Italy in the late 1800s were very, very high. People coming from Italy often came very, very poor. My ancestors, both my ancestors, both sides of the family, both came from Italy. And they both came around late 1800s or early 1900s. All right, so they fit right into the pocket of a very prototypical Italian immigrant coming in at the time. I like to consider myself 100% American, but my ancestors could come back to Italy, so I'm actually 100% Italian. That is my ethnicity. So they came because they were very poor. And we had seen, okay, if you go back to the main reasons, okay, if you think back to yesterday's lesson, we had seen that not only were people, I mean, there's kind of a problem in their homeland, but we know the United States has a lot of job opportunities. And the Italians are going to take full advantage of that. Many of my Italian grandparents, great grandparents, when they came, and many other Italian immigrants immigrated to places like New York. Okay, that's why I am here, right? My ancestors came, they lived in the Bronx. Even though I don't live in the Bronx anymore, my family moved back in the 90s. Obviously, my ancestors could be traced back to the Bronx. All right, now here I am working at the Bronx, which is really cool. And they immigrated to New York. And most of them, again, very good working with their hands, very good at building stuff. Many of them became construction workers and factory workers. You will see a lot of Italian immigrants working on skyscrapers and buildings and, building, schools. Okay, that was a big thing Italian immigrants would do at the time. And a lot of them became factory workers like the Irish as well, but just now more in New York. So the Irish kind of went more to Boston. The Italians went more to New York. We talk about how cultural pluralism plays a fact, but we also know that a lot of these people lived kind of on their own. All right. So with that being said, okay, let's think about how and why Italians weren't treated as well. So the Italians actually, believe it or not, even though most of them are white, okay, and look like me, the problem with a lot of the Italians was they're actually a lot darker skinned than the Irish. And there weren't as many people that were as dark skinned at the time. All right, so what ends up happening, ladies and gentlemen, I'm not sure if this makes sense. Since they actually kind of look slightly different, they were treated usually a little bit worse than the Irish. And then also, this is a huge thing, many Italians don't speak the English language. Where the Irish did, the Italians didn't. The Italians spoke Italian. They spoke their own language. So now when you hear an Italian speak, they speak very little English, maybe no English at all. And they have a very heavy accent because they're not used to speaking, the English language. And that often led to discrimination. Also, many Italians, because they were poor, they took jobs away from Americans in factories because they were much more willing to work for less money. Now, you'll learn back in American history, there was no such thing as a minimum wage. So it's not like, they made $12 an hour. They were more than willing to work for $1 an hour or $2 an hour because that may not seem like a lot to us. It's not. But to them, it's a lot of money. To them, it's a lot of money. So you don't have to be a boss of a company to understand this thought, right, guys? If you can hire someone and pay them $5 an hour and get the same amount of work output as someone who wants to get paid $15 an hour, and they're going to give you the same amount of work, you're going to hire the person that's willing to work for less money. All right, it's going to save your company money, it's going to save your factory money, or whatever it is. So many Italians took jobs away from the native-born Americans. And this is a problem because this led to them being even more discriminated against because, honestly, a lot of them felt, right? A lot of them felt like these people were taking their jobs. And if someone takes something from you, you're generally just not going to like them as much. Okay, you're going to hold a little bit of a grudge. And when it comes to things like jobs, that could become a very big grudge. All right. So this is the Italian immigrants. So we have two groups, the Irish, the Italian we've talking about, both countries, both groups coming from Europe. Most of them, I'm just going back to here, would sail into New York City, into Ellis Island, which we'll talk about in about 5 minutes. We'll look at more, a little deeper what Ellis Island was all about. The last group we're going to look at are the Chinese. Okay, but before that, let's do this Regents question. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, where do most of the immigrants to the United States settle? All right, this is a good question, all right, because we haven't really gone over this, but you should be able to infer where they would go. If you know where New York is and you know where Massachusetts and Boston are, you should be able to get this answer. So where did most of the Irish immigrants settle? Mohammed says 1, Jessica says 1. You guys are both correct. Okay, urban's another word for city. And though we didn't really say that they're moving to cities, that is the truth. I want to look at that more a little bit later on in this unit. And then we should just know they're going to come, obviously, if they're sailing from Europe, they're going to come somewhere on the East Coast. So you could definitely take away the far west. You could definitely take out the Great Plains. So it really just leaves 1 or 2. And we know they're not going to farms. They're going to factories. So 1 is the best answer. So very nice job. After 1880, a major new source of labor for American factories was what? Okay, this isn't a trick question. This is just an example of what you could see. I appreciate you guys participating in this. But what about this one? It's a tricky one. Four is correct. Excellent, because it's after 1880. Before 1880, the correct answer would be 2. After 1880, the answer is 4. Excellent job. All right, that's not easy. Okay, last country is China. All right, now, China's located towards by the Pacific Ocean, south of the green country of Russia. There's a yellow country here, China. I know, I'm not sure if you guys can see my mouse. Okay, so, oh, you can. Great, perfect. Okay, so China's located right here. I know one period they weren't able to. All right, now, if you were from China and you wanted to come to the United States, you can travel across the Middle East, travel across Europe, and then sail over to New York City, to Ellis Island. Sure. But there's a more logical route. The more logical route is just to sail out through the Pacific Ocean. Remember, it's a globe, so follow my mouse, and end up over here, and you're going to come into California. You're going to come into a different area called Angel Island. All right, so the Chinese weren't from Europe, but they were the 3rd largest group of people to come into the United States. Now, you've already seen the Chinese at work. Okay, when we looked at the Great Plains, we looked at the Transcontinental Railroad. They were a very big group that came into the country to help out with the Transcontinental Railroad. All right, so that's part of what we'll focus on here. All right, same thing. One last time, you're going to copy down what's in blue into the blue box, red into the red box, and then we will get into our final video for the period. Okay, so let's go through the Chinese immigrants. So the Irish came because they were starving and there was a potato famine. The Italians came, they were poor. The Chinese came because essentially they lost they had a war going on, or they lost a war rather. So let me explain. A big thing you'll learn in world history when you get to 10th grade is something called the Opium War. It was a war between China and Japan. Oh my God, excuse me. China and Great Britain. And basically, China lost the war to Great Britain. Great Britain's an imperial empire at this time, very similar to how Great Britain owned the United States. Great Britain's going to take control of a lot of parts of China, and they're going to take control over the drug opium. Yes, the war was over a drug. Okay, but it was a opium seed that was very popular and very profitable crop to basically send out to the rest of the world. Great Britain went to war with China over that. You'll learn a lot more about it a lot later on. Okay, what you need to understand is China lost the war. So China is, if you're Chinese, you're now being controlled by Great Britain, and a lot of the Chinese people didn't want to be a part of that. So what happens? A lot of the Chinese people leave China, and obviously they're going to sail on out to the United States. So they become our third biggest group. Many hoped as well, despite even losing the war. Some people came from China because of the California gold rush in 1849. Many people came from China thinking they can make it rich or strike big, but that necessarily wasn't the case. Okay, that wasn't the case because we know many of the people that went out for the California gold rush ultimately failed. Many people from China, the big thing they did was they usually worked on creating American railroads. Yes, the Transcontinental Railroad was one of the major railroads they worked on. And yes, Hung Lei Wo, if you remember from the video we saw last week, was a Chinese person. That is also correct. I think we saw that on Thursday. All right. But out of all three groups that we've looked at, they were probably treated the worst of the three. And you could maybe gather why. We were not as accepting of different groups of people back in American history. And they were a group in particular. The Chinese, that looked a lot different, sounded a lot different, and also had a much different culture. So you could tell a person from China is not, quote unquote, a prototypical American at the time because they look so different. Okay, we know that they have different facial features. Okay, and we also know that their culture is a lot different. Okay, the way they dress, the way they act, a lot different. And then, of course, their language isn't even close to the English language. So this led to them often being very discriminated against. All right, probably more than the other three groups, the other two groups we've looked at. But you're seeing some consistent themes. Okay, when people come to the United States, especially throughout this time, they're not treated as well. Now, if you have an immigrant friend, or you're an immigrant, or you know someone that's an immigrant, you probably are going to have the thought and notion that, yeah, they've definitely faced some discrimination. Of course. Okay, every kind of group of people have experienced some discrimination at some point in their lives. Hell, every individual has experienced some discrimination at some point in their lives. Okay, it's not like it's just, okay, I'm this type of person, therefore I get discriminated against. No, everyone has at some point. Okay, everyone in this class has, been discriminated against at some point. But back in American history, it was a lot worse. Okay, so you're seeing consistent things. When people come to the United States, they are given opportunities, but the treatment of them aren't so great for the most part. And then you're also kind of noticing, of course, that a lot of them were leaving because of problems in their homeland. So this is very consistent to some of the things we've talked about before. All right, so let's see what we're doing now. Okay, what I would like to do is I would like to look at Ellis Island. So a cool thing we could do if it wasn't coronavirus is we can go to what's it called? We can go to Ellis Island, which is located in New York City, right by literally Governor's Island and Statue of Liberty. All right, so it's definitely something we could do if we wanted to. Okay, but with coronavirus, obviously, that's something we can do. All right, we're going to watch this video on Ellis Island now, and we're going to get a better sense of how the immigrants were kind of treated and the process of when an immigrant came in. Now, you'll notice when a lot of immigrants come into the United States, most of them get into the country without a problem, but you will see there are some issues if the immigrants don't have the right paperwork or are sick. So let's take a look at this video, and then we'll finish up the assignment very quickly in a minute.
Estimated 40% of Americans are descended from immigrants that passed through Ellis Island. That's a lot of Americans. The first Ellis Island immigration station opened on January 1, 1892 in New York Harbor to manage the increasing number of migrants coming to America. In that first year, a record number of nearly 450,000 people passed through to enter the United States. By the time Ellis Island closed in 1954, that number had reached 12 million, although most of those people arrived by 1924. Migrants fleeing poverty and persecution or just looking to start a new life traveled by private steamship from Eastern and Southern Europe. Voyages could take 1 to 2 weeks. Ships divided passengers by wealth and class. First and second class passengers slept in staterooms and cabins while everyone else stayed in a space at the bottom of the ship called steerage. Steerage passengers paid around $30 per ticket, but steamship companies would sell as many tickets as they could.
Okay, so really quickly, if you've ever seen the movie Titanic, and if you have seen it, please post in the chat that you've seen it, because I'm just curious. The movie Titanic is obviously about an immigrant ship that sunk. It was the biggest ship in the world at the time, and it sunk and killed a lot of people. Very, very sad stuff, but it was an immigrant ship. But if you've seen the movie Titanic, if you've ever watched it, you would notice that the ship is literally divided by class. You have the very poor people on the boat, and you have the very rich people, and that is very similar to what you'd see in all immigrant ships. You have very rich people come to the United States, but you also have very poor people, and the poor people would be not treated as well on these ships. All right, let's keep going.
First and second class passengers paid even more. Because of this, steerage was often overcrowded and unsanitary, with shared sleeping compartments and no privacy. But hopeful immigrants stuck it out, believing it would be worth it for a chance to live in the United States. When ships finally arrived in New York Harbor, health officers boarded and looked for signs of disease before anyone was allowed to disembark. Healthy first and second class passengers were processed on the spot and allowed to enter the United States without setting foot on Ellis Island. Everyone else waited, sometimes for days, for small ferries to take them to the immigration station for processing. Migrants walked down the gangplank with all of their belongings and dropped their bags in the baggage room on the ground floor. They then continued up a winding staircase to the registry room, which was upstairs for a reason. Doctors stood on the second floor and watched each person climb the stairs for signs of health problems. The registry room, nearly 20,000 square feet with 56-foot-tall vaulted ceilings, was nicknamed the Great Hall for its size. It was here that most migrants' fate would be decided. The first step to entry was a 6-second physical exam by a uniformed doctor. Anyone considered a risk to public health was marked with a piece of chalk and taken out of the line to be examined further. Marks were given for everything from signs of mental illness to trachoma, a contagious eye infection that could eventually blind up to 3/4 of those infected. Those who cleared the medical exam went on to a legal inspection.
Okay, so the first thing you do when you get into Ellis Island is they're going to check to make sure you're healthy. They want to make sure you don't have rashes. They want to make sure you're not sick. They want to make sure you're not pregnant, because if you're pregnant, you're not supposed to be bringing in another person at this time. So if you were any of those things, if you were sick, if you had a bad disease, or if you were pregnant, they would not let you in the country. Now, that seems a little harsh, but that does make sense. I mean, you don't want any new diseases coming into the United States, okay? You don't want any problems like that. So they made sure that, people came into the United States, they were, ended up being okay, all right, and healthy. All right, after that, you had to make sure you were coming in legally. So remember, we looked at yesterday, legal and illegal immigration. This is the legal inspection. They're going to make sure that you are coming in and you are who you say you are. Okay, if you're not lying and you're coming in legally, this is a very easy process. But if you're trying to pull a fast one on the United States, they'll send you home. And you'll see that here.
Passengers were checked against a manifest from the ship they arrived on and asked 29 identifying questions, often with the help of an interpreter. If their answers didn't match the information on the manifest, things like their name, occupation, and country of origin, they could be detained. The legal interviews could take as little as 2 minutes, and the vast majority of people passed through with ease and were allowed to enter the country after being issued landing cards with their name, often misspelled, and destination. For others, the stay on Ellis Island was considerably longer. The few who were detained for either medical or legal reasons could be on the island overnight or for months. Once their records were finally reviewed, they would either be admitted to the US or sent back to the country they came from, free of charge. But only 2% of the 12 million immigrants processed at Ellis Island were deported in this way. After inspection, everyone continued down a staircase with 3 aisles. Those being detained walked down the center aisle, those entering New York City or headed north walked down the left, and those traveling west or south walked down the right. At the bottom was a post office, a rail ticket office, and a place to change money. For some, family waiting to greet them, and for all, a new life in America.
All right, so you kind of see that most of the people are able to get into the country without a problem, though there would be some issues like the medical problems, the legal problems. They were able to get through here. Okay, so last couple things before you guys go. You have an optional, your family's personal immigration story if you would want to share, of course, that is perfectly fine. But really the thing you need to work on before the end of the day are these 3 analysis questions. These 3 analysis questions would be very helpful for you to get these answers all done. All right, so you guys can work on this for the rest of the period, the next 2-3 minutes, or finish this up later. All right, so that is the lesson. You'll see this is, kind of based on a lot of the work that you were doing. All right, I'll be here if you have any questions.